Thank you. So I'm Louise from CACI, as we normally call it, although, like you say, we do get all sorts of pronunciations. So I'm going to be talking a bit about some of the data that we've been using, that we use for a lot of our clients, a lot of the different work that we do, but what we can tell from it about what's happening with our evolving towns and cities. So for those of you who know about CACI, we're a business that's all centred around data, and we do a huge amount of work that varies from, we do a lot of work in the MarTech space and sort of marketing and around customer strategies and digital activations. We do a lot around data and technology and the platforms and the strategy. And then there's a big sort of swathe of what we do is very location focused as well. So I work very much on the location side of things, where we do a lot of work with clients on sort of models and opportunity modelling, but we do a lot around whether it's field sales optimization and things like logistics as well. So I'm very much in the location camp of what we do. I do love a good map. So I'm going to take you through today. We all know that we've been on a bit of a roller coaster of a few years. There's been a huge amount going on. I'm not going to talk through all of this because I think we all know about it. But we are still still feeling the effects of a lot of these changes. And this doesn't even cover everything, to be honest. I haven't even got Brexit on here, I think, which is definitely a factor. But there's a huge amount. The cost of living in particular, all of the different things going on are having a big impact on our places and on the sort of towns and cities and the way that we live, the way that we live our lives. So I'm going to take you through a lot of these data sets, take you through some of the things that a lot of the data sets we use are telling us about what's happening with our towns and cities. A lot of what we do, the great thing about a lot of the data that everybody's been talking about today is a lot of it is available literally everywhere in the world now. So we can do these things looking at all of these patterns everywhere. I'm going to focus today on the UK, but it's, focusing in on, we've got a lot of insight. A lot of what we do is around understanding people and place. So starting with what we understand about people and how people's wants and needs have changed. Looking at things like spending patterns and how we can tell from the data what's happened with how people are spending, especially with the impact of cost of living. Looking about how, using mobile data, what we can see about how people are interacting with our towns and cities, and what does that mean for the centres, the retail centres, the city centres, town centres, and how they are changing. In terms of people then, I always think with almost any analysis that you do, you need to start by understanding the people, and then you understand the people in the place. So people are what's driving a lot of the change here. We do a lot of research into consumers. I think a lot of you probably will have heard of ACORN, our geodemographic classification. We've got a huge amount of insight attached to that, and it's attached to a lot of the data sets that we collect. Through almost everything, the top thing that is coming out is the importance of value. That is really key to everyone at the moment. It is top of the list. Other things matter, but value and cost of living is definitely the biggest thing. We're still seeing this trend that it was happening before COVID. It got exaggerated during COVID, but the sort of this focus on people wanting experience and going out, that's still a really big trend. Climate and ethics is still coming through for a lot of consumers as well. It really matters, but for a lot of people, it's a payoff between that and price and cost. But it is still a factor in a lot of the brands that people are wanting to engage with and the things that they're wanting to do. And we're still seeing that during COVID, we had this big shift to everyone's local areas. And it has changed a bit, but there is still this focus on local high streets and local areas. And online obviously boomed during COVID. It's stabilised, but it's stabilised at a level higher than it was before. And it's still a really important part of how everyone sort of wants to consume, how everyone's living, and what that means for retailers. So starting with cost of living, because that is sort of the biggest topic of the day. One of the things we have is something called disposable income, which looks at the amount of money people have in their pockets when you take into account the sort of their expenditure that's going on other things. So looking at where the impact of that is greatest, we can see the yellow area in the sort of bottom right of the map. So very focused around London and some of the bigger cities where we're seeing the biggest impact of cost of living. When you look at that, breaking it out by demographic and by different areas, you can see these groups like city sophisticates, Some of the younger groups like student life as well, the young hardship, those lower affluence groups which are having the biggest impact. So the impact of cost of living isn't universal, it is affecting different groups differently. We're seeing that, so this is now starting to look at some of the transaction data we've got, which is coded up with Acorn. And you can see so for every group, the average transaction value they're spending on things is going up, but it's going up more for those least affluent groups, basically because they haven't quite got the option to trade down like some of those more affluent groups have. We're seeing some things like in gyms and fitness and that sort of space, spend is down year on year. One of the sectors that seems to be doing particularly well is, QSR, and then we're just hearing from the likes of KFC, but anything around sort of coffee shops, that kind of area, they're doing really well as well. Those sort of slightly smaller ticket price, smaller ticket items where people can still get a treat, and still giving them a treat, and we're seeing that in the brands that are doing well. So. The discounters, so we've got the likes of Aldi and Lidl are absolutely flying compared to the other grocers. We're seeing the likes of Gales and Black Sheep Coffee. They're doing extremely well, and they're not necessarily, Gales in particular is premium within its category, but it's gaining from other categories and people, especially those affluent groups, trading down to it. The likes of IKEA and Netflix doing well. And one that I think is particularly interesting is the rise of brands like Vinted. So Vintage doing phenomenally well. It's now at the same sort of sales level that we're seeing from ASOS. The next one just looks at what's driving that. So when you look at Vintage, obviously it's a brand which is trading well with those lower affluence groups, so the sort of the ones in the orange, which are sort of modest means, striving families, and the sort of steady neighbourhoods. So those mid-affluence groups it's doing well with, always has done. But what's interesting is you're seeing it's rising as well with likes of executive wealth, mature money. And I think it's quite sort of, it's a current thing at the moment, but it's also people are able to save a bit of money, still get the brands that they're wanting, they're buying back their sales. Circular economy is a big part of it as well. So it's seen as it's recycling, better for the environment. So that's a brand that's doing exceptionally well at the moment. Breaking it down and this is now looking at the in the sort of QSR and food to go space, or general food, food and drink space. So just to explain this chart, you've got the sort of average ticket, average transaction value, basically from left to right. So the ones on the left-hand side as sort of lower transaction value, and then their growth. And what you can really see is that those brands which are your average bill at the end of the day isn't quite as expensive, are doing better as people are trading down their treats, essentially. So you're seeing people maybe going for a coffee rather than going for a meal, or starting, and so you're seeing the likes of Gale and Leon's and Black Sheep Coffee doing extremely well, all the coffee shops doing well in that mix, and a lot of the the QSRs. By contrast, you've got those kind of squeezed middle, you can see that coming through, the cost-effective, the middle of the range family restaurants are doing less well, but up at the very premium end, they're a bit more protected, and they seem to, people have still got the money, and they're still doing well. This is one of the things we've been looking at with the mobile data. So I know mobile data has been spoken about a lot today, and we've been using it, like a lot of others, to look at things like footfall. This is now starting to look at it from the lens of what can we tell about working behaviours and working patterns from this. So if you look on the left-hand side, this is showing average trips to work per week pre-COVID, and comparing it to the right-hand side, you can see that there's a distinct drop in the number of trips per week. So we know that hybrid working is a thing, it's coming through, and we can start to really see it in the mobile data that we're using. Using the mobile data, one of the things we do is sort of profile a lot of the different areas to see, classify them essentially on the different, based on the mobile data and the patterns we're seeing there. And we can see that in city worker areas, there's been a distinct drop in the number of areas that seem to be really dominated by workers. Probably not a big surprise following on the previous slide about hybrid working. Tourism, I think, is really interesting. There's obviously been this big increase in staycations, and we can see a lot of the areas that have always been touristy are still touristy, but actually there's been an increase in areas which are showing very tourist-like behaviours. So the seasonality, how far people are travelling to them, particularly around areas like the northeast coastline and Essex. So it's different areas are starting to spike and show those sort of tourism. You can see in the mobile data those tourism flags basically coming through stronger. Local high streets still doing really well. Certain types of construction and ports and logistics and shipbuilding coming through really well. And then we can see those impacts of sort of the urban living areas, which are just people are there more during the day, and that's coming through. So what does it mean to our retail landscape? And I'm conscious of time. We know that a lot of the retail brands have changed. So if you look 10 years ago, these were a lot of the big brands on the high street. A huge number of those have now gone. And in particular, those, the department stores are having really big impact. The ones that have done well tend to be the ones that have done better with their online experience, and that is still true, although I think that still some of those sort of traditional stores may be struggling a bit more. And obviously we've got a lot of brands doing well now, so different brands coming through who are sort of ticking the boxes and doing well at the moment. This one just starts to look at what we're now seeing in terms of the shift on the high street with all the things that we've just spoken about. How is it playing out on the ground? So this is showing, if you compare pre-COVID to now, within different classes of retail centre, what the change in retail strength is there. And retail strength is a blend of the amount of retail that's there and the sort of value of that retail. So the department stores, for example, will count for a bit more. But you can really start to see the impact on city centres. Those bigger town centres have a distinct drop in the amount of retail. And then at the other end of the extreme, you've got things like rural towns doing really well, retail parks doing really well, so that we're seeing that sort of a split in the locations where the retail is holding strong. This one, I'm conscious there is quite a lot on this graph, but this is starting to show within those locations what has been the change in the retail mix in them. So if you go along the bottom, so if you pick out the yellow, for example, at the bottom, you can see that that's where finance, so banks and building societies coming out of centres and the types of centres they're coming out of. You can see the reds start to show you that clothing and footwear leaving the high street, more of it going online. But in a lot of places, that's being replaced by more eating and drinking, more experience, more different types of retail coming in. So yeah, you can start to see that the high streets are evolving. They're shifting, they're changing as sort of in response to a lot of the things going on out there. This is then starting to look at the premium and value mix. So on the left-hand side, you've got the percentage of centres where we've seen a significant shift to value retail, and on the right-hand side where there's been a significant shift to premium retail. And the numbers are much higher. So as in value retail, there's been, generally speaking, a shift across the country towards a higher proportion of value retail. It's coming through it's everywhere, but it's particularly further north. I think what's really interesting is the premium one, where there are still centres where there's a significant shift towards premium. And a lot of that is happening sort of along the south and the southeast, but the southwest, I think, is particularly interesting with I think with the staycation, you're getting a lot more it's been if anyone's tried to get a holiday anywhere in the southwest recently, it's extremely expensive. You might as well go abroad. But I think there's a premiumisation of the southwest coming through that we can see. So that's a bit of a summary. So you can see across the board, the impact of the cost of living is definitely having an impact on retail in particular. We've got those ways of working, people working from home, hybrid working online, and just changing the role of the city, the rise of the staycation, all these themes coming through. But I guess just to sort of recap, across the board we've got so much data, and I think that's come through in all of the talks today, so much data that we can play with now to help us unlock how those places are changing. And I think it was touched on in the panel, but the hard part is then the driving and finding the insight, finding the things that are really going to affect your strategy and affect your modelling, and when you want to build on that to do something, to make your decisions, finding the insight from it. AI and deep learning have been touched on quite a lot today as well, and they are definitely becoming a bigger and bigger part of what I think sort of we're doing and everybody is doing. I know we've got, so new Acorn is coming soon, and that's been built using a lot more AI and deep learning and very different techniques that are starting to come into a lot of the analysis that we're doing. And yeah, obviously I wrote these slides before seeing all the presentations today. But yeah, it's interesting seeing that we have got really specialist spatial data techniques, which are, I think, really key for all of this work we're doing everywhere in the world to help really drive the best from that data. And yeah, that blend between the data science and the geographical knowledge, the geographical skill is absolutely key to getting the most of it. That's it.
Awesome. Do we have any questions in the audience? Hands up if so. In the meantime, if anybody wants to bring up their hand, one thing that came to mind looking at your presentation was around quick commerce. What's the CACI take on that? Because we're starting to see quite a lot of consolidation already.
Yeah.
What's the take?
I did mean to mention that. But yeah, so that is, I mean, yeah, it's, you can see in the data, like I say, it's sort of, it spiked. There's, like I said, there's a lot of churn with the different operators, I think. Some of them are growing. I think a lot of them are now starting to drop a bit. It sort of had a big spike. It dropped a bit. It's, yeah, it's choppy, I think is probably the answer I'd give.
Yeah, I think much like micro-mobility as well, there's some similar things happening in terms of retention. And
I think it's certain, different brands are sort of taking over, like I say, there's consolidation going on. And it's very specific groups that it seems to be doing particularly well with. But yeah, I think one to watch, a lot of the clients I'm speaking to, a lot of people are thinking about it, but sort of testing it and not quite, it's, choppy.
Interesting. Any questions in the audience? This gentleman here. I will look up as well.
Hello, just a quick question. How are you guys able to match this social demographic data to a UPRN level or household level? And if so, how do you guys do it to match it to a certain address and just have enough volume to have like a quality data set at a UPRN level?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're using there is Acorn. So it's a product that we build for every postcode in the country. So using that, we can attach a lot of the different data we use to it. If you're thinking about things like the mobile and some of that sort of data, a lot of that is based on the most common nighttime locations, so where we're seeing the device rests at night. It gets coded with its Acorn code from that. So it's, based on the sort of nearest postcode, basically.
Any other questions? No? Okay then. Well, thank you, Louise. That was a really interesting presentation. I certainly found it very interesting as a UK consumer. Thank you.